Well, we're right at 1 o'clock and time's important to everybody. So I'll probably get started here. Just a quick note, we will be recording this webinar. So if you miss anything or step away from your computer, it'll be available on our website hopefully next week. And with that, I'll kick it off here. Welcome everyone to the CMGC workshop, Contractor's Guide to MDT. My name is Darren Reynolds. I'm the Construction Contracting Bureau Chief. I've been with MDT for about 10 years now, and I'm fortunate to work with all these experts in the alternative contracting section who will be presenting today. And really one of the main reasons to have this workshop now is just to visit about CMGC in advance of the last of our 4 pilot projects that was allowed by the Montana legislature in 2017. We'll soon advertise for the construction manager for the Montana 200 Bridges Lewistown project in February, I believe. And just looking at the participant list here today, 121 participants signed on right now. And I think, if you look at the cross section of folks out there, we have folks from Federal Highways, MDT, design consultants, contractors, and it's pretty astounding if you think about the collective experience that is out there in attendance today. And I just got a note, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Very good.
Loud and clear.
Very good. So thanks everybody for coming. And it's really the collective experience of the group here in the workshop today that we really want to tap into from the department's perspective to help us, deliver, a collaborative design process with CMGC. And another advantage of this delivery method is just all the positive working relationships that are built with these project teams through partnering and through the design development. We're through 3 of our 4 pilot projects, or well on our way on 3 of the 4, with 1 at substantial completion. And we do want feedback on our program. We want to make it the best program that we can. And as far as the webinar goes, we want to make this as interactive as possible. We do want feedback from everybody on the call. Please type in your questions or comments in the chat box, or give us a call after the presentation here today. And go ahead and switch to that next slide, John. Just a little bit of bookkeeping items. Please keep your microphones on mute and your cell phones as well. We'll hold all questions until after the presentation, and then I'll read the questions out loud and try to get the right person to field that question. You can raise your hand with the little hand button by your name as well in Zoom. This will be recorded for future reference, and we'll post it and make it available to you folks. And there'll be 1 5-minute break during the presentation. And then if you need to step away, certainly you can do so and catch the recording later. And then, as Michelle mentioned, PDHs, we will track who's in attendance. So if you need that information, you can reach out to us. And thanks to Michelle for all her work and helping to set this up. Go ahead, John, next slide. So I'll introduce our group of panelists here today. A lot of these folks have been living and breathing CMGC for the last several years. The first person we'll introduce here is Lucia Oliveira. Lucia is the Division Administrator for Montana's FHWA office. Lucia joined FHWA, the Office of Research Development, in 2009, and has also spent time in the Colorado office. John Pavsek is the alternative contracting section supervisor. He's been in that position for the last 2 years. He's got over 30 years of experience in the consulting world, much of it with design build projects. And John is currently the project leader for the Johnson Lane Interchange project. Beth Kappas is pictured there with her dog Willa, the most famous dog at MDT. Beth is a alternative contracting engineer in the section, and she's been with MDT for 12 years, spent 7 in the Bridge Bureau and 5 in our alternative contracting section. Beth is the project leader for the Clark Fork 1 mile northwest of Trout Creek project, which is substantially complete, as well as the Salmon Lake project, which is currently underway. Brandon Graff is another one of our alternative contracting engineers. He's been with MDT in alternative contracting for 2 years, and prior to that worked as a design consultant for 3 years. Brandon's been assisting with the project management on Johnson Lane interchange project, as well as managing several of our design build ADA projects. Chris Wilson is with Innovative Contracting and Engineering and is the lead cost estimator for the Johnson Lane interchange project. Chris is functioning as the independent cost estimator, which you'll hear more about later. And he's been working in the CMGC arena since 2007 with several DOTs across the country. And then the last of our panelists is Eric Miller. He's an alternative contracting engineer. He's been with the department just not quite a year now. He has worked with Wyoming DOT for 10 years and has 20 years experience in design consulting, where he co-owned and managed a firm working on transportation projects in Wyoming and Montana. And next slide, John. With that, we'll take a quick look at the agenda and then I'll hand it off to Lucia. So first off, John is going to cover the first 4 bullets, I believe: CMGC fundamentals, partnering, roles and responsibilities, and an overview of the decision-making process. And then Beth will take on risk identification and management, as well as key in on some of our scheduling processes. Brandon and Chris will cover cost estimating, estimate reconciliation, and the ICE. And then I think John will pick up early work packages, procurement process, elements of a good SOQ. And then Eric Miller will wrap it up with the status of current and upcoming CMGC projects. Then we'll touch on some lessons learned with a few different folks. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And I will track down the questions as you guys type them in the chat box and read them aloud, and we'll try to get some discussion going. And with that, I would like to welcome Lucia Oliveira.
Thank you so much, Darren. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. At the FHWA, we have been promoting the benefits of alternative contracting methods, and specifically CMGC, through an initiative that we call Everyday Counts, or EDC, that was launched in 2011. Every 2 years, the EDC initiative gathers a team of transportation experts to explore and select a handful of proven innovations that are not well known or fully utilized in practice. They have the potential to improve and transform the transportation sector, to help transportation agencies save money, time, and/or lives. This EDC initiative is state-based. The FHWA provides resources and technical assistance, but the states themselves select and implement the innovations that work better for them. Some of the other innovations that EDC has promoted include Safety Edge, warm mix asphalt, prefabricated bridge elements and systems, and many, many others. If you're not familiar with EDC, I really would like to encourage everybody to go over to the FHWA website and take a look at all the EDC innovations, and to provide input during the next round of innovation selection, because that will make this initiative work much better. Next slide, please. So several states have some form of statutory authority to utilize CMGC, And this map just continues to expand very rapidly as more states realize the benefits of this method. As Darren said earlier, here in Montana, after significant efforts educating the legislature, MDT was allowed to deliver 4 pilot projects utilizing CMGC. FHWA promotes the CMGC because it's very effective for capturing design and construction innovation, among many other benefits that you will hear about later today. CMGC promotes collaboration between designer and contractor. Early contractor involvement during the design phase fosters an atmosphere of partnering and trust that results in better communication and issue resolution during the construction phase. With everyone's active involvement, including consultants and contractors, this delivery method can be successful in Montana. MDT has put in a lot of effort in this workshop, so please take advantage of their expertise and ask a lot of questions. Thank you so much, and I will turn it over to you, John.
Let's see if I can get this thing to advance. Well, I actually want to, so I appreciate that, Lucia and Darren, good lead in. I also want to throw something out. I'd like to thank Beth Kappas and Chuck Nymphakos, who passed away last year. Both Beth and Chuck set up our program. They working for Jake, they spent countless hours putting this program together. And so if you, I'd like to just put a hand out to them. And I do know that Beth and Chuck both received an award, a governor's award for a project of excellence here recently, the Trout Creek project. So hats off to those guys. I will remind folks that I am getting some feedback on your mics. If you could turn your mics off, that would be great. So anyway, I'll get started on the program fundamentals. We have quite a bit to cover here. We're going to zoom through these fairly quickly, and we've got quite a few speakers. I'm going to slow it down when we get to the point where we're talking about the actual acquiring, getting a project. Now, I will say that one of the reasons why we set this presentation up, or this workshop up, is to help our contractor friends and consultants and to some degree our functional managers here at MDT. And the reason for that is that it's not intuitive to write proposals. Engineers do it all the time, but contractors don't necessarily. National firms, yes, they do. We want to prepare you to be ready to actually get some of these projects. We'd love to see these become organic. These projects going to local Montana contractors, and we want to give you the best leg up. So without further ado, I'll talk a little bit about what is CMGC. It's obviously different than design bid build or design build. CMGC is a 2-phase contract with the contractor. Phase 1 is a pre-construction services, and now and that's what we will be going out to RFP and RFQ for here in 2021. We're selecting our construction manager. Phase 2, assuming that we have a guaranteed maximum price that meets the guidelines, we allow that contractor then to go ahead and transition into phase 2. The second player, so the contractor is player number 1. Second player actually is a consultant, and we have selected consultants. We generally select our consultants ahead of time, probably 3 to 4 months ahead, simply because we want them to be able to start gathering information so that when the CM comes on board, you're able to hit the ground running and start basically getting into the trenches with the designers. The third party, very important player, is the independent cost estimator. Chris Wilson is going to provide some of his insights on what he looks for and what his function and role is. I will say that MDT has a much more expanded involvement. MDT functional managers especially, whether it be bridge or hydraulics or environmental, but essentially we bring these folks in early and often, and we'll describe some of the benefits associated with that. So why are we using it? It encourages collaboration and innovation, 2 very important words to our contractor friends in developing your proposals. We improve risk management. It's a great opportunity for us to identify and really ferret out risk. We think of risk, but we don't necessarily always document it, and we don't develop mitigation strategies. But that's our goal here, is to recognize and minimize that. And some risk is just unavoidable. We'll talk. Beth's going to talk about that a little bit. But if it's unavoidable, then we price it. But we're not surprised. And we also make sure that the appropriate person takes on that risk. And I'll show you here soon in a future slide, we do reduce errors and omissions. And there are very few change orders associated with CMGC, unanticipated change orders. And then it is another tool in our toolbox. We don't anticipate all projects are going to go CMGC. I mean, it'll just be a select few because, again, there is a lot of work that goes into it. It's not for every project. It's like design build. We will go through a process of selecting our projects to fit CMGC. Talk a little bit about project time comparison. It's a busy graphic, and actually there's an error, not an error, but there's something I need to point out. But if you'll notice, design bid builds has been our traditional means of delivering projects. The last 15 years, we've been delivering projects using design build. Job order contracting is another way. I'll not mention that here, and so construction manager general contractor is our newest program, our alternative program. You'll see on the right that essentially we save from the normal time savings. We can save anywhere from a year to 2 years, and in the case of Trout Creek, we save probably 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years of time on that. I will say though that the design time, the design time is similar to the design bid build time. We're finding that actually we're able to reduce that design time in CMGC simply because we're making decisions earlier. We're vetting them. We have, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we basically can reduce that time frame. Cost certainty is, we obviously get the earliest cost certainty in design build, but construction manager, general contractor, we have cost certainty during the design phase towards the 90% completion design. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background on the construction cost growth. This is some information we received from University of Colorado. Cost growth, or you can call them change orders or quantity overruns. Typically, we see fewer on smaller projects, less than 20 million, fewer than design build or design bid build, and it's kind of weird to see a negative sign in front of it. But as Beth and I talked about it, that could occur if, let's say, you're costing risk, and that risk does not end up, that particular risk item doesn't happen. What ends up happening is that you could actually have reduced costs. So anyway, so there's certainly a cost growth benefit. Project delays, I mean, this slide can kind of speak for itself. We're seeing nationally, we're seeing fewer project delays. Again, it's because the CM is involved, the contractor is involved in that design process, and our schedules are usually pretty spot on, or pretty darn close. So we'll go through the CMGC selection, or project selection. As Darren mentioned, that we have 2017 legislature gave us the ability to test 4 pilot program projects. We have 1 project has been completed. 2 projects are currently under design. The project completed or substantially completed is Trout Creek. The 2 that are in design are Salmon Lake corridor, as well as Johnson Lane interchange, and our last project will be the Montana 200 bridge bundling project. That'll be advertising next year. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about those 4 projects, Eric, at the very end of the presentation. We have implemented a project delivery selection process. We meet with all the key stakeholders. This is done obviously before the CM is brought on board. But we look at several things, five main factors when we look at a project on whether we deliver design build, design bid build, or CMGC. We look at the opportunity to manage risks, schedule impacts, cost impacts, project complexity, and opportunity for innovation. And we actually systematically go through those, and we assess which project is best suited to handle that. For the projects that we have now, those all went through a PDSP process, and they were all deemed valid for CMGC, and we will continue this process as we move forward. Hopefully, with this, the 2025 legislature approving CMGC as a tool for MDT. Let's talk a little bit about partnering. It's a little bit out of order, but I think it's good to start off with it. partnering is basically it's when I first got into it, to be honest with you, I was a little bit skeptical, but having gone through one, I could tell you that it really opened my eyes to how blind we can be, and we really need to look at other people's objectives. We really need to work together, especially on complicated projects, to establish goals. So according to this, and this I actually will say that we have utilized Jakes and Associates on at least one of our projects, I think possibly more, and they have provided MDT and MCA with some partnering training, but it's basically mindset, commitment, and process. The principles, there's 9 principles here, and you can kind of read them. Obviously, I'm going to basically jump to the last one. Mutual respect is huge. Collaboration is huge. And trust is huge. Now that's doesn't mean the others aren't, but essentially mutual respect is imperative. You need to be able to have respect. You need to be able to work together. Partnering goals our partnering goal is to establish team goals and individual commitments. Partnering meeting format, real quickly, I'll just say that we usually MDT meets with the consultant, the CM, and the ICE. We have key decision makers. It can be anywhere from a 4 to 8 hour exercise where we ferret out our challenges, issues, concerns, and set goals as we move forward. We lay our concerns on the table. I can say that we actually in our Johnson Lane interchange partnering, there were things that I was not even open to doing, and such as the use of Bluebeam, because I had thought that Bluebeam was not a tool that we could use, but I was talked into it by the contractor and by our consultant. And so I was able to meet with Dustin Rouse, and he approved our use of Bluebeam as a tool for reviewing plans. One thing's for certain, and that is team unity will be tested. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that's just human nature. It's going to be tested. You're going to find people aren't going to agree with other people. There's potential for heated discussions, and that's why partnering is important. Team challenges include estimates coming in high. They could be understanding. You need to understand our pre-construction delivery process, and Beth is going to hit on that throughout this presentation. Risk identification and allocation. Who owns the risk? How much is the risk cost? When does it happen? Is it even a risk? GMP outside, this is a biggie. If our guaranteed maximum price, which is the term for GMP, is outside of our limits, our guidelines, then we risk the potential of actually not being able to award to the construction manager. And again, we're going to talk about that a little later. Requirement for a higher level of commitment. Personality dynamics is huge. I mean, again, periodic check-ins will keep us centered, and it works. As I'd mentioned, it's working for us. We meet probably at every milestone, 30, 60, 90, and 100% besides first. So we check in. So but leadership needs to make it work. Leadership really needs to keep their eyes focused on what goals did we set and are we accomplishing those. Follow the process and have faith that this will succeed. I'd really love to spend time on this, but essentially you need to recognize that you need to trust the process, that we will come to an agreement, that we will come to agreement on price, and be able to deliver the project. And finally, remind folks that the project is your common goal. This is a consensus team goal that we all signed when we met last year. I won't go through it, but essentially, like I say, it sounds a little rah-rah, but to be honest with you, it works. Let's talk a little bit about and I think this is important for the contractors to understand, is the roles and responsibilities of the team members, the key team members. There are 6 team members. Basically, there's the MDT project leader. That's someone here in alternative contracting. It's Beth, Brandon, myself, or Eric Miller. We have a consultant, MDT's consultant design manager. That would be someone who works with Ryan Dahlke on our 2nd floor or 3rd floor. They are, and we'll get into what their role is. The design consultant project manager, this is our consultant that we hire. The construction manager, the CM. The engineering project manager, this is our These are the folks that deliver in the district. So we assign an engineering project manager or EPM. And finally, the independent cost estimator, a major player in this process. So I'm going to keep moving. So project leader basically is the alternative contracting. It's interesting because of the fact that we manage provide general management and project oversight. We are the ones who make sure that the project keeps moving. If we spot a train wreck or a problem or an issue, it's our responsibility to make sure that the right people are looking into it and that we come to some sort of a resolution. We monitor the overall project scope, schedule, and budget. We guide the design decision-making process and come up with, we guide consensus. So, and we're going to speak on that a little bit here shortly. And we monitor and manage potential conflict resolution. The consultant design manager, and this might be in my case, Fred Benty, and others up in our consultant design, they manage the consultant's contract scope and budget. So we work very, very closely with these folks. They manage the EPS schedule, and that is MDT's design software schedule. That's basically, it's a critical path schedule. Again, Beth is going to talk a little bit about that. The consultant project manager and the design manager is also the consultant's project manager. In the case of Montana 200, that would be Dowell. So their main point of contact is that design manager, and then they worked with myself and my staff very closely. Design consultant project manager manages their scope, schedule, and budget. They facilitate design development meetings. They're the main point of contact for the project manager, and they work with MDT project leader in all aspects of the project. I will say that the CM is hugely important on CMGC projects, but truly the design is being prepared by a consultant. They're stamping it. They're standing behind it. They probably spend 60 to 80% of the total effort that goes into these projects, into the delivery of the project. So I won't say they're driving the bus, but they're a huge player that you as the contractor, as a CM, are going to need to be able to work with closely. The construction manager, that is you guys, or the contractors. You represent the entire contract team, including any joint ventures or subs. Any partners. You provide constructability, innovation, design, and design-focused expertise. You are responsible for identifying and pricing risk, or helping to identify and price risk. You develop the construction management plan, which includes our schedule, and you manage the development of the production-based estimate. The engineering project manager, that's the field person who is going to be in charge of actually constructing it, is involved throughout the project design. And they're brought in right off the bat. They're responsible for managing the project during construction. They provide MDT district construction perspective to the construction manager. They participate in design development discussions, and they provide local knowledge of district challenges, weather, availability of materials. They're a great resource for the contractor. And then finally, the independent cost estimator, they prepare the opinion of probable construction cost or production-based estimate. They do it, Chris is going to talk a little bit about this, but they do this blind. They basically do it independently, but they represent I wouldn't call it competition, but they represent the cost of what that project should be in their eyes, using the same criteria, the same construction items. They collaborate with the CM on approach to price, and they support risk management, identification, allocation, and pricing. So in the CM has multiple roles. There are four. The first one is design related services. Basically, you're going to assist the agency in the consultant design on a weekly, bi-weekly, tri-weekly basis. You're going to be there at every meeting. You're going to have 1, 2, or 3, however many folks are necessary. But generally speaking, a small group of managers will be assisting in helping us move on and start working with the engineer in assessing design development. You'll provide formal design reviews. You work in parallel with our functional managers, and those, again, those are people like our hydraulics engineer, our traffic engineer, our structural engineers, those folks. But you're in the mix. You're basically providing those reviews. You're providing constructability reviews. You're doing it throughout the project. We don't necessarily have one formal constructability review point at each phase of the project. We're constantly looking at, is this option constructible? You're performing market research, cost analysis for design build. I would call this our DART process, or decision analysis and resolution team. That's a kind of a common term that's used in CMGC. But essentially, you're there to assist us in making decisions. So if we come up with an option, let's say an example would be raise the bridge or lower the roadway under the bridge. Well, there's certain things that have to go into it. We make those decisions, but we require your assistance in what is that price, what are the impacts to the traveling public. So you're integral in that. You help shape the project scope of work. If we have a project that's pricing at 20 million and we're all in agreement this is a $20 million project and we got $12 million worth of budget or $15 million worth of budget, you help us, if we can, to try to figure out, okay, or where are we heavy on scope? What can we remove from the project? So that's a role that you could serve as well. And finally, under design related, options analysis and innovation development. This is sort of the day-to-day, less formal analysis of looking at making decisions on design options. You also provide schedule-related pre-construction services. So MDT has a very specific consultant design schedule. We need to follow that, and you need to understand that. And I would implore you to make sure you understand our design constraints. We can't just throw it out the window and say, hey, let's go to 90% design. We simply we need to follow a process, although we can work within that process. Prepare detailed construction schedule. That's basically a contractor lead. You develop a construction phasing strategy. You help us. You give us your insights as a contractor on what's the best way to phase this project, utilizing weather, utilizing resources. You recommend scheduled design development meetings. So I mentioned earlier about your role with working with the consultants and MDT. We meet on a biweekly basis. And we basically have a running agenda of items that we look at. And so you provide a lot of insight into that, into what we need to be looking at next. You're constantly analyzing the schedule for risk impacts, and you're analyzing risk register for potential schedule impacts. CM cost related. So the fourth item service is cost related. And first is you coordinate with MDT and our engineers regarding our bid items. We have, for folks who are not familiar with MDT, bidding MDT projects, we have specific bid items that we adhere to, we follow. Those bid items may not be necessarily be consistent with what might be done in Utah or Idaho or Colorado. So you need to be familiar with that if you're not already. Montana contractors don't have any problem with that. They understand our bid items and how our specs work. You prepare, this is a biggie, production-based cost estimate, construction estimates. There's different programs, different formats, but you will work parallel with our ICE to come up with your estimates. You'll assist with life cycle cost analysis. An example here might be flexible pavement versus rigid pavement comparisons. We don't ask you to make that decision. You just provide us the basic information and the impacts, and then we make that decision whether or not we want to go concrete or asphalt. And this actually did occur on our Johnson Lane interchange project. You cost design options. Essentially, it's the DART process. Material cost forecasting. You're predicting what's it going to be like in 2 years. What do we anticipate our material costs are going to be? Is concrete going up? Is our fuel prices going up? I mean, that's something we have to do when we're estimating these projects. And finally, determine cost and probability of risk items. So if we have risks that we identify, then it's we rely heavily on you to cost those risks out, and the probability, if it's a 5% probability or a 90% probability that thing is going to occur. And then finally, administrative related pre-construction services. You coordinate contract documents, your own documents with MDT. There is a process that you will be, working with us, developing your contract, your schedule, or your scope and your budget, as well as negotiating the contracts and as well as if you joint venture, you choose to joint venture, then that also is part of that responsibility. In some cases, some states rely upon the contractors to provide third-party stakeholder coordination. An example here might be meeting with the utility company. Again, it's not something we've done much of. We usually take care of this on our own, but essentially that the CM can provide an opportunity here for expanding their constructability knowledge. Assist with public relations and attend public meetings. MDT typically takes that role of working with the public. But we do rely upon you to help us out. Subcontractor bid packages, that speaks for itself. Study labor conditions with COVID, with other things happening. We don't know. There may not be enough labor in Montana to conduct a project. You may be looking at Oregon resources. But those are things that you're going to do. You're going to look at. And then finally, we ask the CM to hire the partnering consultant. For our CMGC project, our next one, we will be requiring that. And so, essentially that's even though it's a collaborative effort on partnering with that, usually is managed by the CM. So let's talk a little bit about the design decision-making process. How are we doing on time, Brandon? Are we doing okay? Okay, good. See, they were going to give me a shock collar, and but they don't make them this big. So anyway, design decision-making process. Under CMGC, we found that things are moving really fast and furious, to be honest with you. I don't want to make that sound like we're being reckless, but it's moving really quickly. And quite frankly, we're making decisions more often. The one thing we don't want to fall into is making a decision without getting complete input. And unfortunately, I found out the hard way that doing that actually and not getting everybody's input delayed a decision being made. So what we've done is we've integrated, this actually is an excerpt from our approach to our Johnson Lane interchange, and we essentially make decisions at the first tier level. We have the EPM, the consultant design manager, the contract the project leader, which is again Brandon, myself, Beth, or Eric, the consultant project manager, and the contractor CM project manager. And in those situations, what we do is we make sure that we need to make sure that all 5 of these parties are in 100% agreement on a decision. If one of them has reservations, then we need to ferret those ideas and those thoughts out. But basically what we want to ensure is that we have 100% consensus. We don't do it just by ourselves, although we get together and we essentially whack the gavel on decisions, but we make sure that we have engineering, MDT functional managers, and contractor support services actually providing that, so in the sense like an MDT functional manager might be a traffic engineer, and I'll show an example here where traffic engineering was critical to making a decision. So we needed to make sure that the experts, so subject matter experts in traffic, were like the option. So I'm going to go through an example. And again, so basically what we do is we set parameters, we set guidelines. In this situation with this district, we selected anything under $100,000. We can make a decision at that first tier level. If it's over 100,000, we still are in agreement, but we bring that up to the second tier, which is either the district pre-construction engineer or the construction engineer. And assuming that they feel comfortable making one or the other or both make that decision, then we, again, we whack the gavel. But if they feel uncomfortable with it, then they'll take it to the district administrator. And if it's critical enough change, then that the DA has a number of folks that he might tap into bureau chiefs or counterparts here in Helena. So I'll show you an example of how this decision was made. This is a diverging diamond interchange. This is a concept that was provided to us by the consultant. Actually, initially we started out with 105 or 110 foot wide median. That's a real lot of concrete. And we recognize, and I know that when the CM came on board, they looked at it, they built several of them. And they said, geez, we've seen 14 footers in Utah or whatever. And we started doing some research and realized that, maybe there's some other options out there. And I'm not faulting the consultant whatsoever, because essentially they were following Federal Highways guidelines or guidance documents, and they came up with a design. But we asked them to go back. And again, this was being prompted by the CM. They're saying, should we look at some more, because there's going to be advantages to it. There's going to be, we have a ton of utilities out there. We got a very, very long bridge, 111 foot long span that we need to, or more. Let's look at some alternatives. And you also need to consider traffic control. So we asked them to look at some alternatives. So they came up with 3 or 4. One was 96. And the narrowest was 37. I happen to like this one a lot because it seems cheap. But we needed to take a look and step back and say, okay, let's take a look at these 5 criteria: cost, constructability, cost of the improvement, constructability of it, including how do we handle traffic control. That's a big deal because we have to consider those soft impacts. Schedule, is it going to help or hurt our schedule? We need to look at job site safety. That power line that you see on the slide there, I think it's a 69 kV power pole. But we don't want if we can avoid it, we don't want contractors working close to that. And if it's not going to be moved. So that's something we look at. And finally, function. Function in this case, if it were a hydraulic issue, it'd be hydraulic capacity. In this case, it's a geometric design. And so we ended up visiting with the consultant and with MDT Traffic. We ended up coming up with a compromise: 67 foot wide. It'll handle all the traffic. It'll the queuing for these intersections. It provides good sight distance. It gives us everything, and it optimizes our safety for that particular process. So again, the only reason I'm bringing that up is that you, as the contractors, are going to be, you're going to be in the mix. You're going to be helping us out with that. So I'm at risk identification and management. I'm going to turn the time over to Beth Kappas, and then after that, I think we're going to be taking a break. So Beth, do you want me to advance to the next slide?
Sure, yeah, John, we can just go ahead and get started with the next slide. So again, this is Beth Kappas with MDT, and maybe just, I guess, starting us off with a couple general comments about project risk. At the top of the slide here, we have an interesting FHWA survey result noting that the misallocation of risk has found to be a leading cause of construction disputes. And then I guess maybe aside from how risk is handled within a project, I think it's also fair to say that generally project risks are on the rise. And I think, just with increased traffic volumes everywhere and a bigger push to provide less disruption and really minimize all the impacts associated with construction, I think our transportation improvement projects are getting increasingly complicated. So I guess to me, this background information implies that it's definitely beneficial to be more proactive about managing risk. And I think that's why we're seeing, the popularity of CMGC go up and be used by more and more agencies. So next slide, John. So risk identification and management is really inherent to this contracting system. And kind of like John was talking about when he was discussing our project delivery selection process, the level of risk associated with a project is a really big factor in determining whether or not this delivery method is applicable for the project that's being considered. So, is it a good fit for CMGC? And in CMGC, we have this awesome opportunity to rely on and utilize an expanded project team, and that really allows us to identify, allocate, and mitigate risk much better than in other delivery methods. So, that's kind of the power of this. Again, this really implies that CMGC is well suited for highly complex projects. And I think another recently published research paper talks a lot about risks that require owner involvement are a good fit for CMGC, and they kind of just had some examples. A couple of those were when stakeholder communication is key to project development, or maybe when you have really challenging traffic management issues, or if owner input is helpful on means and methods, like for implementing new and innovative materials, or if you're looking at new construction technologies. So again, those are just a couple of examples of project risks that can really benefit from operating under this contracting model. So next slide. So I guess diving into the details on what MDT's risk management process has looked like for CMGC projects in a little bit more detail, starting off with who's involved. That's a pretty easy one. It's the whole team. And so it really is an effort that takes contributions from the owner, the engineer, the contractor, and the ICE. And it's a process that happens throughout the life of the project. And MDT is primarily responsible for maintaining the risk register and documenting the risk process and kind of facilitating the risk discussion. But all the information that's developed really comes from and is agreed upon by the entire project team. Next slide. So a little bit more about the process itself. Risk management certainly isn't anything new, and there are lots of resources out there that describe really what a proper risk management effort looks like. And I would say MDT's approach to risk management on CMGC projects is definitely consistent with a traditional definition of the process, which is kind of outlined by that series of arrows on the bottom of the screen there. The goal really is to complete a detailed analysis of risk that really considers all the phases and aspects of the project. And we want this process to be as tangible and scientific as possible. And I think that the point of that is really helping to ensure that we're managing risk in a way that best supports the project, rather than managing risk in a way that disproportionately supports the interests of any one entity working on the project. So again, supporting that project first mentality. And keeping things real, really, during risk analysis really relies on the team's ability to identify specific design, construction, and performance risks. So again, detailed process. And at the end of the day, we are trying to complete a quantitative analysis and assign some numbers to the risks that we're tracking. And again, there are lots of techniques for doing that. Some of them are more complex than others. I think one that is often associated with risk analysis is a Monte Carlo. Although that's certainly a more robust way to look at things, MDT has taken a little bit more of a simplified approach to the actual number crunching and analysis side of things. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. Next slide. So this is just a screenshot of an example MDT risk register. And for these CMGC projects, we've primarily documented the risk management process through an Excel spreadsheet. MDT does have a risk register template that the department has relied on for a number of years. However, we are making some project-specific adaptations to that document just in order to better fit the project team and the needs of kind of what's at hand. So going back to the Excel sheet and the simplified analysis, it might sound a little bit rudimentary, but I think that's all rooted in the idea that our goal is to create a living document that is user-friendly and really facilitates collaboration across a wide project team. So I think we see a lot of benefit into keeping the process simple and flexible, I guess. Next slide. So I think kind of the rest of the risk slides here give an example of a project risk and then just how it kind of works through the risk management system. So we'll just kind of cruise through this quick, but the first step is risk identification. And the example on the screen here is a detailed project specific risk and a good example of what we're trying to track. And I guess per typical risk management procedures, we're really looking to keep it specific by identifying if-then scenarios to use as our risk statements. So, for a sample project that's a bridge rehab, and we're intending to reuse steel superstructure elements, this might be a risk that we track. If structural steel repairs are more extensive than anticipated, then construction time is extended and repair costs are increased. So again, example of identifying a risk. And then next slide. So after risk identification, we move on to the assessment and number crunching side of things. And the first step here is really to determine the probability and impact of a risk. And John touched on this previously too. And the probability is just, what is the chance that this risk will actually occur? And then the impact is, what effect does this have on the project? Is this a game changer if we encounter this risk, or is it not that big a deal? And so when it comes to assigning these probability and impact numbers, I would say our risk process has typically relied on the Delphi technique, which I think is a fancy way to say we really rely on the expertise of that core project team that knows the details of the risks that we're assessing for a specific project, and really has a lot of experience to draw on in establishing what a realistic probability and impact is. So again, that's a team discussion, and again, we really rely on that expanded team to define that. And then the probability and impact is used to determine a risk score. This is a number that's on a somewhat, arbitrary scale, but I think it's helpful because it kind of allows us to sort our risks and really prioritize our mitigation efforts. So what are the risks that are the biggest players? And that's just an easy way to identify that. And so I guess maybe moving on to the next slide, which is risk mitigation. And there's obviously a million ways you could mitigate a risk, just depending on the circumstances and the resources available. So maybe to kind of talk about some mitigation strategies for this example risk that we've been tracking. One thing you could do to mitigate the risk of unknown steel conditions is just to do additional investigation to determine the condition of that steel. And so you can do that, in advance of construction to learn more, and then you might decide it's appropriate to reassess the probability or impact of the risk that you've been tracking. So just by learning more, we can really refine our risk management process. Maybe instead of, or in addition to that type of mitigation approach, I think in CMGC, we also have the opportunity to define an allowance to cover the cost of a risk should it occur. And so the idea here is that we can set aside a calculated amount of money to pay for a mitigation strategy if it's needed. And so again, the goal in CMGC is to pay for risk only if it actually occurs. And so I think with all the parties at the table, we can kind of work through this strategy and approach in a pretty thoughtful way. And again, the allowance that's set aside is based on realistic estimates for the construction work at hand and the materials involved. And then I think with our design team too, we can, write up a special provision to really illustrate what the plan is. So, if we run into a really terrible top flange that's of condition X, we're going to go with plan A to repair it. Or if we're seeing condition Y, we'll go with this other plan B to repair it. So again, I think just we have a lot of opportunity to spell out that plan in advance, which is maybe not typical to some of our other delivery methods. And then again, this contingency item is kind of paid like miscellaneous work. If we run into the risk and we use the money, it's available. If we don't, it's reverted back to the main project fund. Next slide. And then I guess just kind of rounding out the risk management process here, I think this can be pretty simple, and it just boils down to the idea that we have to continue the conversation on risk and always reevaluate our past assumptions and strategies. So I think the risk management process outlined by the little row of arrows kind of implies that it's a linear thing, but it's not. It's really a cyclical, iterative process that continues throughout the life of the project. So regularly scheduled risk workshop meetings are definitely a big part of the process. And a big deliverable for the project is a snapshot of the risk register that characterizes what's known about the project at the time that we're kind of taking that snapshot. And so, in summary, the risk information for a project is ever evolving, but basically, we can't go wrong as long as we keep talking about it and reassessing the risks and re-identifying new risks. So I think that's kind of all we had on risk management. John, if you want to move to the next slide. So changing gears entirely now, we just wanted to take a super quick look at what the pre-construction phase of MDT's CMGC projects has looked like. And John did touch on this a little bit, so we can work through this pretty quickly and get on to the break. But next slide. This graphic shows MDT's typical consultant design project flowchart, and all of the activities bubbled out here primarily represent the engineer's deliverables and corresponding review activities. And so this is kind of our starting point for mapping out our pre-construction plan. But not all of these activities apply to every project, and we're really looking to optimize and make this fit the needs of the team and the project. So starting place, it's adapted as we move along. And then I think too, just the complexity of what you're looking at here does imply, like John said, that there's a lot to the design process and it's fairly complex. I think MDT would typically anticipate several years of design development for a big complex transportation improvement project. That being said, we are seeing much reduced pre-construction timelines in this delivery model, similar to what other owners are noting. I think, expedited project delivery and schedule compression are certainly really positive side effects of CMGC, and our process has experienced that as well. And I think that accelerated pre-construction timeline is really primarily due to the efficiencies of working in this expanded team, as John had said. And so, and the goal really is to just optimize what we're doing and focus on that and commitment to construction. Next slide. So kind of running parallel to that consultant design project flowchart that we just saw are a number of other estimating activities and CM specific deliverables that happen on CMGC projects. And so kind of those top 3 boxes represent some of the elements that come along with the estimating process. And Brandon and Chris are going to be talking a lot more about that. So we won't get into that detail now, but just, that's certainly going on in addition to all the design work that the engineer is completing. And then also occurring at each major milestone is development of the construction management plan. And John talked a little bit about the content of this as well, but again, this is kind of the primary deliverable of the CM during pre-construction. And this report includes a summary of the estimating assumptions and also just a summary of all the estimate comparison results. It also houses information on suppliers and subcontractors. It includes a narrative of the planned construction approach just based on the information that we have at each milestone when we're compiling that data. And it also includes a detailed construction schedule and just, kind of all that information related to constructability. And so this is all the stuff that we wouldn't typically have access to in the design phase. And so in my opinion, this is the piece that's so important for guiding project development towards that more robust project plan, and is just kind of where that constructability information is housed in general. So I think that's kind of a quick overview of the pre-construction phase. And I guess maybe now moving on to the most exciting part of the presentation, our break. I'll turn it back over to John to kind of set us up a time frame for the break.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take, it's right now I got about a minute till, a couple minutes till. Let's go ahead and go pick it back up at 2:05, if you don't mind. We're going to pick it up promptly. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. It's 5 after. We want to stay on schedule. We got quite a bit of ground to cover. So I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Graff and Chris Wilson. Real quickly, Chris, can you hear us okay? I want to make sure we have a mic check on you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sounds
okay.
You bet. All right, Brandon. Yep.
Thanks, John. So just a quick overview of the flow of this little portion of the presentation. I'm going to be covering the estimating milestones and then the estimate activities within each of those milestones. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Wilson to talk about the role of the ICE and dive deeper into production-based estimating. So as far as estimating milestones goes, one of the biggest hurdles I would say to CMGC is learning some of the terms. So right here, we've got the 10 to 30% is the rough order of magnitude, which generally comes in at that 10 to 30% mark. And that is, it's a unit price estimate generally with high contingency and lots of unknowns at this time and some preliminary risks, very little design at this time. And then at the 30%, which is MDT's alignment and grade review, AGR plans, is the first production-based estimate submittal. And at this submittal, we are focused on some of the big picture items like safety, function, drainage, right-of-way, environmental impacts, and other major aspects of the project. So we're not seeing a lot of detail, and we're not seeing a very good grasp on the quantities at that time. So we're still making a lot of assumptions, and we've got high risk, high contingency. The next submittal is 60% plans, which is considered plan in hand for MDT. And at this stage, we should be finalizing the alignment profile. We should be seeing more detail, which will result in a more accurate set of quantities and less contingency. And as far as risk, we should be identifying those like at that 30% and then really starting to focus our efforts on mitigating the risks and going through those mitigation strategies that Beth had pointed out. We should be doing that at 60% plans and then all the way through the 90 and 100%. As far as the 90% plans, that's considered our final plans. The details are being finalized and we still want to keep mitigating those risks like I just talked about. And then the 100% plans is the plan specs and estimate or PS&E package. And this is the final review of the plans. There may be very minor revisions after the 100% or the PS&E plan submittal. And this is or at or near the estimate reconciliation meeting, which I'm going to touch on the estimate reconciliation meeting a little bit more, is where we are negotiating the GMP or figuring out where we've got our major variances in the GMP, which is the guaranteed maximum price. And then after negotiations, the CM, the ICE, and the engineer will submit their final production-based estimates to MDT for comparison. And the contractor must not be 10% greater than the ICE's estimate at that time, or else we will go into more figuring out the cost variances in the estimates. And on a national average, the contractor and ICE are usually within 2 to 4% at this point, and it's pretty rare that a GMP is not successful. The reason it would not be successful is because we haven't been working together as a team and working through the costs through the project design. And so going back to if we are within 10% at that GMP stage, or excuse me, if we're not within 10% at that GMP stage, we have two recovery methods. One of them is to simply resubmit the estimates. Somebody raises their hand and said, hey, I might have blown a number here, let's resubmit. The second recovery method is going into a GMP reconciliation. So those final production-based estimates were submitted to MDT, and we would then put them into our comparison spreadsheet and actually go into another reconciliation workshop and figure out why those costs are different for certain bid items and where we're seeing those variances at. And then I just wanted to note in here that this is from the CMGC guidance document. If a recovery method is unsuccessful, MDT may reprocure the work through another delivery method, and the contractor loses the right to construct that work in the GMP. And the contractor is also ineligible to rebid through another delivery method. And like I said earlier, this is pretty rare on CMGC projects. We're usually within that 2 to 4%. And then going back to those production-based estimates, if we are within the 10%, when MDT compares the estimates, we will go through a balancing exercise to distribute risk, overhead, indirects, for example, to the appropriate bid items to ultimately develop a unit price estimate. And those will be developed independently. And then we will advertise the project on BidXpress for 5 to 10 days. Then the ICE contractor and engineer will submit their final GMP through BidXpress. And then, like I said earlier, if we get to that stage, we should be absolutely certain that we're going to be coming in 10% or less more ideally that, 0 to 4%. So what actually goes into a 30, 60, 90% estimate reconciliation process? So the first thing that we're going to touch on is a constructability review. And this is the first look at the full plan set. The MDT contractor and ICE will have about 1 month to review and comment, and that is dependent on the project schedule. Some projects are going to have more of a expedited pre-construction phase, so they'll be a little bit quicker than that. And then this is when the contractor will begin conceptualizing the construction phasing and impacts and making suggestions to enhance the constructability. They might point out something like, hey, I can't build that. We need to design around it, or we need to change the design to something that I can build. And that's going to result in less change orders in the construction phase. And then this constructability review is going to help with the future estimating efforts. The next step is the approach to price meeting, which generally takes place either during or shortly after the review period. And we may have several approach to price meetings. I know on Johnson Lane right now, we're doing kind of estimate task force meetings that are similar to this approach to price meeting. And the purpose of these meetings is just to make sure that the contractor, engineer, and ICE are on the same grounds for estimating the project. And this is an important step so that we do not see large variances in or at the estimate reconciliation meeting in some of our D groups, work groups, or some of the major bid items. And so an example of what will be covered in the approach to price meeting is cost estimate narrative or estimate instructions. It should identify where we're putting the indirects, where we've got risk, what the contingency, what our assumptions are, and also we should be sharing information. So sharing crew sizes, material costs, share subquotes towards the end of the project, or agree on subplugs, towards that 30 to 60% design mark. And then finally, start talking about the means and methods for construction. And like we've been talking about with CMGC, we've got however many project managers in the room, which adds up to a really great resume of experience. We should see a lot of innovation here because people have, or these managers have been on a lot of projects and they've seen a lot of projects built. The next one is the estimate development period and then submitting the estimate. It's going to, the development duration is going to depend on the project schedule. The contractor, ICE, and engineer will submit estimates, and then the ICE and MDT will have the opportunity to review all estimates. And then just keep in mind that we are keeping that ICE blind throughout the process. The pre-estimate reconciliation meeting, it generally occurs the day before the estimate reconciliation meeting. This is kind of a smaller meeting where the purpose of it is to take a first look at the comparison spreadsheet, which we're going to show what that comparison spreadsheet looks like in a couple slides here, so you can get an idea of what we're going to be looking at. But mainly it's to identify work groups or D groups where the estimate reconciliation meeting will need to be focused, and we need to dive into some of those major variances and figure out where our differences in cost are. And then the ICE engineer and contractor will have the opportunity to modify estimates based on some of those preliminary discussions. So in the estimate reconciliation meeting, the CM and the engineer are going to be open book pricing. So we can see all the pricing that I'll show you on the next slide here. Keep in mind that the ICE is blind to the process, but we will be seeing a percentage difference from the ICE and contractor and the ICE and engineer.
Can I ask you a question real quick, Brian? Is the CM and the engineer estimating on the same basis, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, CM and engineer, they're two separate estimates. They're going to be coming in separately.
Okay.
So here is the estimate comparison spreadsheet that I've been talking about. So you can see over on the right-hand side, we don't have, this is just a example spreadsheet. I threw in some dummy numbers for unit price just as an example here. We've got the contractor versus ICE comparison. So down here, we got the ICE is blind, so we never really do show the exact numbers that the ICE is coming up with, but we do show these comparisons. And so what we're doing at the pre-estimate reconciliation is identifying, for example, this work group right here, these surfacing items. We've got a $9 million item that is 5 to 15% different from the ICE, and that we don't know if it's over the ice or under the ice. We just know if it's different. So we'd like to identify that at the pre-estimate reconciliation so that when we get into that estimate reconciliation meeting, we can dive into some of these sub items, like plant mix surfacing. This one's a $2 million item that's greater than 15%. Let's start talking about how many man hours you have in this item. What's your labor cost? What's your equipment cost, materials cost, etc., so that we can dive down into figuring out where those variances are at, how the CM is planning to build the project, how the ICE plans to build the project, and really close that gap of differences between the 2 or 3 estimates. And then through discussion of the estimate reconciliation meeting, we should be able to lower the estimate variances. And then this is the post reconciliation estimate. So after discussion, the ICE contractor and engineer will have 5 to 10 days to make revisions to their estimates, and then they will submit it based on the discussion from the estimate reconciliation meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about the role of the ICE.
Thanks, Brandon. You guys hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. So the role of the ICE on this project is, it's a little different than you might think. While we are definitely part of the team, we really don't answer to anyone but the open market. Our estimate essentially has to represent what the project would bid at in the open market. Maybe not high, not super low, but we have to be within a range accountable to the open market. So as we go through all of these pricing activities that Brandon has laid out, we are part of the team. We've done some of the most complicated projects across the country, and so use us, right? We help the team to focus on problems that are going to cause pricing changes, hopefully improvements and design improvements, and really focus not so much on the pricing of the project. We'll let you know what we feel the fair market can hold for this project, but our focus is to help foster the team environment to be able to accomplish project goals and and maximize the mitigation of risk and the development of innovation. Okay. Next slide. So as we go through this is a difference in production-based estimating versus historical. I'm sure all of you know very, very well the historical prices and how they're used, and the strengths and weaknesses of using them in comparisons. We have spent years and years figuring out the minute details that helps get us to what we call a fair market price. Okay. So as you can see, this is we use HCSS Heavy Bid. There's a ton of different software companies out there that provide heavy estimating services. This is just one of them that we use that's pretty commonplace. And so as you as contractors or as design engineers are putting together these estimates, this is the level of detail that we are going to expect out of you and that you should expect out of us. And we're going to take every single bid item. John, can you focus in on the left? Yeah. Next slide, I think.
Oh, we don't have that blown up. You're going to have to probably work off of this.
Okay, that's fine. So over to the left, we have all of the bid items for the project. And you can see within those, the unsuitable over-X, we have what we call activity level details. Once we get into the activity level, that's the excavation. We break out the haul off, any dump fees, and replacing the material, buying and placing. So we take equipment rates that we've gotten from local leasing companies, or we've done our Blue Book investigations and made our modifications based on utilization, current fueling rates, mechanic and lubing and fueling operations. We take all of that and generate our equipment rates. Labor is calculated with union agreements and prevailing wages based on the project funding and based on the type of project, so that we do get down into a lot of detail. And as we go through the pricing reconciliation exercises, you guys as CMs need to be able to communicate not just to ICE, but to MDT and the design engineer why costs are what they are. And so it might be part of your production-based estimate. It may be another diagram showing crane picks or showing a complex utility crossing where we have to go in layers and we have this kind of conflict here and that kind of conflict there. So we're going to be making sure from an ICE perspective that we all understand and can communicate the project challenges and be able to mitigate risks and implement the innovations. And that wraps up my spiel on production-based estimating. John, if you want to take over.
You bet. Thank you very much. And sorry about that. We had a little bit of I had pulled those slides out. I didn't think I thought it was a little too tricky to try to zoom in on certain areas. But I guess the point being is that we really wanted people to see the detail in that slide. So thank you, Brandon and Chris. We'll go ahead and talk. I'm going to touch very, very briefly on early work packages. So basically, in special situations, we have the option in CMGC to implement early work packages. They have to make sense. They basically, well, let me see here. So we should use them to reduce risk, to be used to reduce project risk. They need to be, early work packages are considered if we provide clear schedule or constructability advantages. They must be severable, meaning if we build this facility or we build this element of the project, it can be a standalone project. And if the rest of the project does not proceed, this improvement will be, basically won't impact traffic operations or hydraulic capabilities, those types of things. So it's based on fully developed design documents. So basically, early work package, it goes through the same process of estimate reconciliation. It needs to meet our criteria for 10%, that criteria that Brandon brought up. It needs to show that it saves time, reduce inconvenience, and reduces construction costs. It can't cost more than, or we would probably seriously not consider it. And finally, as I'd mentioned, it needs to follow the GMP cost guidelines of less than 110% or closer to 2 to 3%. So again, it's not something that it's something we might consider in a very unusual situation, but we prefer to, and I think other states adhere to this. We prefer to basically put the project as one whole project and hopefully build it all at once without breaks. So we're really good on time. We do have probably another 40 minutes to go. I want to spend a little time on the CMGC contractor procurement process. In hiring the CM, it's a two-phase process. Essentially, we have a phase one is the request for qualifications, which requires that you prepare a statement of qualifications, and then we issue a request for proposal in which case then you submit a technical proposal. By law, we must consider cost when when awarding a project. That's by state law. And so we have to have a cost component that's very challenging to do when you don't have much design. In fact, you have no design, quite frankly. So we've researched with other states. We've talked to our internally and with our federal highways friends, and we've come up with an alternative to actually using as a cost a fixed fee markup price. Essentially, what we do is, excuse me, in selection of the CM, we actually have you submit your fixed fee markup, which is essentially your profit for application when with the final GMP, or guaranteed maximum price. So it's basically, if you say it's 12.8%, you're selected, then 12.8% is allowed to be applied as your profit for that project. Let's see. So basically, the process, so we start out with the SOQ. That's probably anywhere from probably 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And then we get those SOQs. We score those SOQs. We have we have anywhere from 6 to 9 reviewers. They're generally subject matter experts or construction folks, but basically they're handpicked. They're usually highly experienced NDT staff or managers. Then they score those, and then we send it. We come up with a final score ranking, and then we send that to our selection committee, who's made up of higher level. These would be the Jake Gettles, the pre-construction engineer. In some cases, it could even include a deputy director, but basically it's a 3 to 5 person group. Federal Highways, because these projects are PODI projects, Federal Highways always sits in on those selection processes. So once you're shortlisted, then you have anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks to prepare what we call a technical proposal. It's your technical approach. If anybody is experienced with design build, the big departure here is that you're not preparing plans. You're basically preparing a quality-based summary of your team, of your approach to CMGC and this particular project. We're going to get into the details here, dive into that pretty shortly here. Again, we follow that same scoring process. We take 2 weeks, followed by, assuming that we have consensus, then we go with, then we'll go ahead and have the selection committee review that. At that point, then we start scheduling interviews, and you start preparing your cost proposal. In this case, again, it's that fixed fee markup. So we schedule interviews, and we're going to talk in detail on the interview process. So once we get through the interview, immediately after the last interview, and we've been scoring these interviews as we get done with them, the interview panel is the technical review panel. So essentially, we're carrying that technical review panel from the SOQ through the proposal through the interview. We stay consistent there. And then assuming then what we do is, once we have those scores, we open up the cost proposal, we apply that, and we calculate what we call the best value team. Assuming everything goes smoothly, we have selection committee approval and recommendation, then we submit our recommendations to the commission for award. It's about a 4-month process is what it boils down to. So here we're going to talk about the elements of a good statement of qualifications and proposal. And I'm going to start off by saying that these comments that we're bringing in, these are based upon our comments from our technical review committee, from our selection committee. We basically track all of the good, the bad, and the ugly on these proposals, and we basically document those, because we'll end up debriefing with the winners and the losers after the project is awarded. So we want to have a good documentation. So I got a lot of these comments from there. Part of it also is, I have worked in the consultant industry and have a background in business development. So these are some of the principles that are applied by a lot of our engineers. in their efforts to in their design, going after design projects, either design build or design um, design bid build projects. So first part, as we'd mentioned, part one is the SOQ. It's made up of a transmittal letter, summary of the team, key members, CMGC related projects, and understanding and approach. And we're going to talk about some of these because we repeat a lot of this requirement in the RFP, in the request for proposals, but it's weighted 50% on the understanding, 25 on the weight of the CMGC and related projects, and 25 on your team. And the we have elected to, in these pilot program, we've elected to shortlist all firms. So we are we allow you to do that in design build. We typically have we shortlist the top 3 and possibly the 4th, and anybody else who doesn't meet within a certain percentage of those, that the average of the top 3, you know, they may or may not be asked to submit a proposal. In this situation with our project, we're giving everybody a fair shot at it. We do, however, rank those. We provide you with a ranking. So, and this is really for you to make that business decision, whether it's a go, no go. At this point, we're proposing that our next project will follow this format. We will pre-qualify all firms who submit, and you have the option to say, you know what, if I'm ranked 4th or 5th out of 5 or 6, or 4 or 5 people, you may decide not to go after it. But that, again, that's your business decision, because it does cost quite a bit of money to actually go after these projects, as some of the Montana and out-of-state contractors have already know. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the SOQ staffing. We suggest in your staffing you use tables, simple org charts, and interface, staff interface, and I'll explain that. Maximize use of tables in your proposal. Use tables to outline your team, their past experience, what they're going to be providing to this particular project. Org charts, we don't really, org charts, you be as simple as possible, quite frankly. You don't need to be artistic, and you don't have to be fancy. Make sure your projects match up with your team members. So, for instance, if you have projects listed in another section of the RFP or of your statement of qualifications, you want to make sure that your project manager is listed as being involved in most, if not all, of those projects. Some folks have made the mistake of actually providing a project manager, and that project manager had no experience in, or was not involved in any of the projects that you're listing as your related experience. So that can be a big deal. Let's see, photos. Photos are good in org charts. I mean, we actually like those. We've had people say that they really like that. What are the team members' contribution to the project? Consider what they're going to do. Again, this kind of goes back to that staffing, and just describe what their job is going to be, what they contribute to the project. This is a big one. Consultants and contractors, some have tripped up on not following the RFQ and RFP. When I say that, I mean the RFQ and the RFP have organization. They have organizational requirements on the sections, plus they have requirements within those sections. And an example might be your staff. List your staff's home office, or your office where they're located, list their years of experience, list their education. If you don't do that, or if you're inconsistent between your staff members, it's the technical review committee. They're carefully reviewing it. They're going to note it, and they're going to note that as an inconsistency and a deficiency. So again, follow the RFQ, RFP. Even if the RFQ or RFP is a little strange to you, the order, you really, my advice is follow it. Make it work. Figure out a way to make it work. Draw off of similar experience. So we've had a lot of folks call us and say, hey, we don't have a lot of CMGC experience. Is that going to hurt us? Well, having CMGC experience, I mean, I won't kid you, it does help. It obviously helps. The more the better. However, what we've found out in the last 3 projects is there's a lot of contractors, and I'll speak to the Montana contractors here. You've done a lot of work for us on projects where you might have acted, it wasn't a CMGC project, but you've really acted in the role of problem solver. You've worked with the EPM or the district or design to come up with the different solutions. So find those projects where you maybe had a mutual problem. It wasn't necessarily a design issue, but it was something that you needed to overcome, and you stepped up to the table and helped resolve the issue. And I spent time earlier talking about the people. You need to know who you're going to be working with in your role. You're part of a group, a big group. So you need to know who you're working with and what their role is and what your role is in relationship. Use photos, matrices, and graphics wisely. I've seen countless times where someone will plop a photo in there of a grader going down the road, and it means nothing to a reviewer. To me, it's a huge waste of time, and it's kind of a disservice. Now, that's my personal opinion, but I've heard that from others. If you have a graphic, if you have a picture, if you have something, make sure you tie it to your discussion and make sure that it serves a purpose. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and that's actually true. Graphics and pictures work really well. The other thing to consider too is TRC members get really tired when they read pages and pages and pages of this stuff. So try to make it as easy as possible on their eyes, on the font styles. Don't just cram everything in there and make it like, I mean, we do have font requirements, but sometimes there's different fonts make it, I mean, they hurt your eyes. There are better fonts. I mean, that's just a little thing, but quite frankly, if you're trying to stack the cards in your favor, that's something to consider. And then finally, the SOQ should be your outline for your proposal. So what you put in the SOQ really is going to be basically the springboard for your proposal. The SOQs are limited in page number, so you're not going to be as into the weeds as you are with the proposal, but a lot of that SOQ, statement of qualifications information, is going to be repeated and expanded on in the next section. So that, speaking of which, so now let's say you've been pre-qualified, you're moving forward. We have 4 sections. Section 1 is our project team. There's a cover letter that goes with this. It's not necessarily part of section 1, but a cover letter goes in. Some people have used those cover letters as an opportunity to list their strengths. Obviously, we don't want, again, wordy, long discussion, but use that cover letter as an opportunity to list your strengths, list perhaps some key elements of your approach. It can also be used as an executive summary of your entire proposal. But people have been creative. One word of advice is, and this is something that I heard, is for every us that you put in your letter, have 4 or 5 of them. Meaning, if you mention yourself in there, then 4 times in 4 other places you're going to mention MDT. You're focusing on us. We understand there's a tendency to kind of talk about how wonderful we are and what we're going to do and all the wonderful people we have, but really MDT wants to hear what you're going to do for us. So this is your opportunity to start that in your proposal. Work from an outline, we talked about that. Avoid being wordy. Just, again, people get tired of reading words, and sometimes, what do they say? Don't buy back something you already sold. So just list it, be specific, clear, concise, use short sentences if you can, short paragraphs, but just list the facts. And quite frankly, you'll sell us right there. The org chart, we talked about that. Use that org chart wisely. We've had people who misuse org charts that they're just goofy. They just can't understand them. They don't make sense, or they're hard to read. That's one thing. Again, a simple org chart works fine. The other thing to consider, and people want to know that, they want to know that the hierarchy, the communication from that team is there. And this is your org chart of your team. But QA needs to be in the right place. Don't put QA down at the bottom, or if we want a QA person to be listed as a key person, don't list 3 QA people. That's been a common mistake that we see in a lot of proposals, both the engineering and contractor proposals. Matrices can be useful. Again, matrices are very, very useful. Sometimes they can be done on 11 by 17, but oftentimes they're used for, when you're trying to jam a lot of information in a matrice or a table, you're doing it in on 11 by 17. What we don't want to see and what can work against you is don't just use 11 by 17 willy-nilly. We really want you to be selective. Because the 11 by 17 basically, and I'm not sure if we've changed our process on that, but are we using 11 by 17s as 2 sheets, Brandon? Do you recall?
I think it was, I'm not sure. It'll be spelled out in the RFP.
Okay. Yeah, we'll spell it out in the RFP, but in the past, what's happened is that we considered one 11 by 17 sheet as being 1 page, and we have page restrictions. And so just, again, be selective in using those and how you use those 11 by 17 sheets. Be consistent within and across proposal sections. And really what I mean here is that, so if you list 8 project leaders in your org chart, and you're in a and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, in a later section of the proposal, and the project manager is not mentioned in there, or you dropped out the environmental person or whatever, be consistent. People are looking for that stuff. They're saying, well, geez, they said that Bob was going to be, he was going to be doing something, and he was going to be a key player, but yet he's not even mentioned in our approach. So you have to be cognizant of that and see and recognize that. So consistency is huge. Pick good projects. Pick projects that your team members, the more team members that you have that you're listing in that team, this project team section, who are on those example projects, the better. Like I say, and again, we ask for CMGC and other similar projects. Again, if you can't just produce CMGC projects out of the blue, you might have to rely upon some other efforts. You need to be creative is really what it boils down to, and without stretching the truth. So look for that. And then finally, this section is 10% of the written proposal. I think some of the comments, I think I covered, a couple other things in regards to the staffing. So, and some people really do look at how much experience your staff member might have. You might have a key staff member, might even be a project manager with minimal experience. And when we say that, we're probably saying 15 to 20 years. So if they have 8 or 9 years, lots of times people look at that going, wow, they're putting a youngster on our project. Well, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of really talented people out there. You need to recognize that's something that we see. You need to look at that and say, how do I overcome that? How do I sell MDT that this person he's phenomenal or she's phenomenal? I mean, that's your job. Typos are deadly. Don't do typos. People really start losing confidence when they see typos, unfinished sentences. We've had all that happen. And let's see. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes I've seen people do this. They brought in value-added specialists, such as they might have brought in an engineer. I'll just use an example, a hydraulic engineer on a project is very hydraulically oriented, or a geotech engineer. You'll bring that person in as a subject matter expert on your team. It can be good, it can be bad. You have to recognize that person is not going to take the place of the consultant or their sub-consultants. Their sub-consultant and their consultant are still in charge of delivering that element of the design. But if you can sell us on the idea that person really provides either local knowledge or understands a terrain or understands the issues and is going to provide a value, you have to sell us on that value. I spent a lot of time there, so I'll head on to the second item, and that is strategic project approach. Again, follow the RFP organization. Address what's important to MDT, and we call this the silver bullet. You need to find out what's important to us. An example of that might be, the different people have different priorities. I can probably tell you right now, a DA does not want to receive phone calls from disgruntled people. and the engineers, they have different priorities, what's important to them. You need to try to figure out what is important to MDT for that particular project based on, and a tailored approach. And so you figure out what those silver bullets are and weave those into your proposal, into your approach. Tables and graphics can be very useful. We've hit on that multiple times. Clearly address our goals and challenges. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. It's helpful to illustrate you've done this before. I mean, you can bring up ideas, thoughts, concepts, approaches, but quite frankly, there's a concept of proof. You identify a challenge, you discuss your approach to that challenge, and you list past similar experience handling a challenge like that. I can tell you right now, if you had and I'll just throw a geotech issue out there, a wall, a certain type of wall, if you've done that before, and you can, essentially you've sold us that, yeah, these are they're experts. They know what they're talking about. But you really do need to consider that in proposing your approach. Tie approach to design milestones. I think Beth and Brandon both kind of talked about the design and the design milestones. How are you going to manage risk and innovations? Again, this is a biggie. Again, this kind of capitalizes on or follows in what Beth was saying. There's risk and innovations, and you're going to be a huge player in that. Be creative with ideas, and don't limit yourself. Now, what I will say is that there have been folks have made mistakes and have proposed an approach that they propose one solution and one solution only. And quite frankly, that can be deadly. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. It's good to sit down when you're preparing your proposal, vet ideas, vet different approaches. And then when you do that, and we'll get into that here shortly, when you do that, then you need to show us what are the benefits of that. But again, propose approach isn't just essentially just say, I can do this. It's something that we're thinking about. Quite frankly, you're going to impress the technical review committee that you're doing your homework and you're looking into it. And again, and finally, discuss at least finally on this slide, discuss your collaboration with MDT, the consultant, and the ICE. Continuing on, consider how you're going to address early work packages. That is a kind of a standard request that we're going to ask you is how do you handle those? Can you provide value-added services or tools? This is an opportunity, and we talked a little bit about providing a value-added person on your team. Well, maybe you've got, and I can't think of an example here, but if you've got a service, a piece of equipment, a tool, or some sort of knowledge, specialty knowledge, this is your opportunity to sell it to us. It all adds up. Don't neglect safety. If you look in the bottom right corner of this slide, Vision Zero is huge with our governor, current and our governor, our director, with the whole department. So essentially safety, both work zone safety and then future safety, the improvement. We want to know how you're going to manage quality. Now, recognize that quality, there's two areas that you're going to be providing. In the CM, essentially your quality is going to be focused more on pricing, on risk, on risk management, assessment management, innovations, but you also need to let us know that you've got quality covered in the construction. And then typical cross sections, graphics, designs are valuable if done right. We like to see those, to be honest with you. People are intrigued by a well thought out cross section of I'll just say wall or of a bridge section or something to that effect. But basically, we like to see that, especially when you're proposing innovative solutions. This section is weighted at 40% of the written proposal. I want to back up. One thing I've neglected to mention is under your approach and basically under the entire, the RFP is going to ask you for both construction construction management and construction approaches. So in the approach section, you are going to be asked to develop your approach to the actual construction. I won't get into the details, but we're looking at both. But the one key factor in this whole selection process is that recognize that we know you're all good contractors. I mean, if you've worked with MDT, you've got a record here. You've delivered projects. But what you're selling us on is your ability to be part of a team and a team approach. You're basically putting your dozer and your scraper, you're not bringing those in the CM stage. Those first 3 to 4 years, you're basically there as you're operating as a consultant. So remember that. And it's never business as usual with CMGC. You have to step out and sell us. Now, section 3 is the approach to CMGC project, the delivery process. Hit on the 3 main points: collaboration, risk, and decisions. Mirror section 1, I'd mentioned before, consistency. Make sure if you're bringing people into this discussion, like Jim is going to handle this, or Bob's going to handle this, or Joan is going to handle this. Well, make sure that there's consistency with that team approach, that team section. Clearly convey the specific benefits of key staff. That kind of speaks for itself. How are you going to reduce cost and manage risk? You need to explain that. Describe how you're going to guide the decision analysis and resolutions. Help us to understand how you feel that you're going to contribute to that team of coming up with decisions and coming up with resolutions to making those design decisions. And remember, again, I keep hitting on this, you're part of a multi-disciplined team. You're more than a contractor. You're a contractor partner. Let's see, and that, I think on that one, that actually section is 30% of the written proposal. Kind of running out of steam here. It's been a long afternoon. So section 4 is a project innovations and resources section. Be creative and open-minded. As I mentioned before, we don't want, put your thinking cap on, try to figure out how are we going to come up with different solutions and be creative. On the flip side, you need to really convince us. I mean, if it's new technology, if it's untested technology, you got to recognize that, and you need to overcome that. You need to tell us how you're going to overcome that. State agencies as a whole are generally not real subject to major changes without having lots of past history success. Might be a pipe material, it might be an aggregate source or an aggregate gradation, but regardless, you need to understand that you're going to have to sell someone, a functional subject matter expert or a functional manager or multiple folk or the engineer on that solution. Generate a metric that gauges the impacts of the innovation. So if you have an innovation, and a lot of people I can rattle off all kinds of innovations, what I think to be innovations, but really are they suited for the site? Are they really providing an advantage? What kind of an advantage? And tell us what advantage are we getting out of that? Is it a cost advantage? Is it a speed of construction advantage? Is it a maintenance reduction advantage? But you need to sell us on that. Provide examples and outcomes if you can. Tell us how your team is structured to brainstorm and evaluate and track those innovations. Kind of covered that above. And kind of hitting on what we just said, are innovations right for the site and the conditions? So again, untested innovations or innovations that just don't seem appropriate, excuse me, you need to ferret those out. And this section is 20% of the written proposal. So up until the last project, Johnson Lane, so we have the interview process is actually half of the total score for the technical proposal. So the interview score and the technical proposal score are combined. They're basically 50-50. And quite frankly, we went through working through MCA. We actually went out, Jake and Darren, requested input from through MCA. Hey, are you guys, do you like the interview process? And quite frankly, we almost had a unanimous, yes, we like the interview. It's an opportunity for us to really show you how we work. And I'd say I agree with that. So we are continuing with the interview. The interview is weighted at half. I'll start here. I actually did some research and I found out there's a word for public speaking fear, and that's glossophobia. And I got to tell you, I've been there. And I'm sure you guys, I mean, some people are terrified to get in front of folks, but I can tell you that it can be overcome. There's ways to overcome it. And quite frankly, as nervous as you think you sound, we're not hearing that same nervousness. So the interview format is, again, we mentioned it's half the total technical score. It's up until COVID, we were conducting them in person, but we will be conducting our next one. We anticipate using a virtual format. We'll define that format. We have our interview is basically 3 predetermined questions. We do not share those questions with you. And there's a reason for that. We don't want you really to have a canned interview coming in. We really want to hear how you are going to address issues. And we want to know that you can think on the spot, quite frankly. You're all in the same boat, you and the others. You have 15 minutes. We give you approximately 15 minutes to review the question and 45 minutes to present. It's essentially nearly almost 99% you talking. We basically are sitting there, we're scribbling down notes. The technical review committee is sitting there reviewing your responses and your presentation. And so you won't hear much from us. But you basically have an hour for this and not a minute more. We have to cut you off. The questions are developed so that you can interweave those from your proposal. So when you're sitting down in 15 minutes, what we really would like to see you do is actually bringing your proposal into the interview. People have made the mistake of not talking about something that a TRC reviewer really wanted to hear about, a concept or an innovation. So make sure that when you're doing that, bring those in. Be relaxed. Of course, this is I mean, you really need to practice. You really need to review it. If it's nothing else, just keep rereading what you plan on saying. But essentially, practice is critical. The best teams, the teams that have really knocked it out of the park for us, have indicated that, yeah, we basically just practice our brains out. I mean, even though you don't have the questions, we throw hypotheticals out there, but we're getting their team ready. You're going to be our partner. That's why I said it's 50%. So start with this interview. We've seen some of this is mistakes, but some of these are words of wisdom. Don't have one person dominate the discussion. You might have
going.
Someone's mic is on. You mind shutting that off? Okay. I'm going to do a mic check. Can you guys hear me okay? Can someone, Darren or somebody else?
Yeah, John, I can hear you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so getting back to the presentation. So avoid one person dominating the discussion. It's happened. It doesn't mean that you have to have, if you got 45 minutes, you have to split it 5 ways. But basically make sure that that person, that no one is dominating the discussion. Also, make sure you have clean handoffs. So you hand it off to somebody else. We've seen this happen, and it's cooked some people in their interview. It basically really dragged them down, but someone else would interrupt. You have to show respect. You have to trust that. Now, on the flip side, if let's say someone hands it off, a project manager hands it off to an estimator, and the estimator or the project manager hears something, he may have to correct it, but that's okay. Those things, or amend it with, hey, and by the way, Bob, you probably we should tell them that we have this type of software or whatever. But basically, it's okay. I mean, that's just showing respect. Be cognizant of your body language. Slumping, chest, hands over your chest, or hands crossed. You need to send a good message. Be intentional with graphics and figures. People have really used graphics to their benefit, and others have brought them in, and basically they might bring a sheet of paper in or something and never refer to it. If you have a graphic, or you have, whether it's a flip chart or an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, plan on using it in your interview, or don't use it at all, because again, it's kind of awkward, to be honest with you, because we don't know what to do with it. And then consider value-added participants. You may consider bringing in, I think I mentioned this earlier, you might consider bringing in a subject matter expert. Use that, but again, only if you feel that that person adds value and is not going to conflict with perhaps the engineer or the engineer's subcontractors or subconsultants. Discuss the project challenges in your approach. Pretty self-explanatory. Address the key elements of your proposal. This is your opportunity to expand. As I mentioned earlier, we want to hear. We want to hear you expand on something, especially if you think it's just such a great idea and we've got someone just dying to hear you talk about it. It's happened. This has happened before multiple times. Avoid bad-mouthing past clients, subcontractors, engineers, or the public. That just comes across really bad. I can tell you right now, nobody likes hearing that. It makes us wonder about, hey, are you going to be, is that how you're going to be in the whole CM process? Tell us how you're going to communicate internally and with our team. Keywords, and this is kind of weird, but you wouldn't believe that sometimes I know on one presentation, someone used the word transparency, and one of our technical review committee members was just all over it, loved it. Because that person used a word that had a meaning and used it appropriately in their presentation. Brandon helped me with this one. He said, know your virtual platform, know what you're doing, know what your room setup looks like. If you're doing this, you're not doing this here now in the commission chambers, you're doing it probably from some remote office, conference room, or even individual people, but you got to know what you're going to do. We ask you, I mean, even though I said it's one-sided, we haven't been encouraging contractors to talk. Quite frankly, we've kind of reversed that. We want you to ask questions. We want you to interact with us. Recognize you have a very limited amount of time, so don't waste your time, if you don't think it's using it wisely and it's cutting into your presentation. And be excited. I mean, show excitement, we want you to be excited. So we're down to our last few slides and looks like we're going to be out of here about on time. So we go through, we actually, as I'd mentioned before, we have a selection process. It's very well documented. It's very, we try to be as transparent as absolutely possible because again, you're going to come in here if you don't win this job and you're going to say, how did I score so bad? How did I get second in this situation? This isn't a real project. This is a dummy project, but in this case, we say, okay, we have 8 reviewers. We have 4 sections to the technical proposal. They're all weighted accordingly, and we have 3 sections of the interview. The interview and the technical proposal are split. So we basically go through, we have a numbering system. We go 1 to 10. It's a process we've used for 15, 18 years now with design build. It seems to work. The orange basically can represent where someone heard another reviewer talk about it. We don't do consensus scoring. We basically do individual scoring, and we want our people to be independent thinkers. But however, we also want them to hear if reviewer 1 is a geotech and reviewer 4 is a hydraulic engineer. We want reviewer 1, the geotech, to hear something that the hydraulic engineer had to say, and he or she may end up changing their score. They may have been at a 9 or something. They said, this is the best geotech approach I've ever heard. But if they failed in that section on their approach to hydraulics, well, then that's what we do that. That's why we do that. So we go through, we can spend anywhere from 3, 5, 6 hours going through these scores, and it's happened. And then we make sure that those scores, again, are fairly close. And then when we're done with the interview, we actually repeat that. We actually go through the 3 questions and we say, how did they handle that question? They come up with, so then what we'll end up with is a total ranking or a percentage score, 85 and 80 on this situation. The second component, the price score. So basically, we ask you to put your construction phase multiplier in. And we have a formula. We came up with a formula. I'm not going to go into the detail because we really don't have a lot of time, but we can, if you care, we can talk about it later. But essentially, we're looking at the average, the average multiplier. So in this case, we have a 10, a 9.65, 11.5, and a 12. and we said the closest to average is 10.8. And based upon that, then we actually calculate the closest to average score to that mean. I'm not sure if it's a mean average, but essentially then we come up with an equation, or we have an equation that actually takes that score. It calculates into a construction phase multiplier total score, and essentially it's weighted, and this is important to understand, the technical proposal and interview score is 80% of the total best value scores. So basically we have, in this situation, contractor A had the lower score. They may have had the better multiplier, but they still had the lower best value score. So in this case, contractor B is the apparent best value firm. And so I'm not going to spend again a lot of time on that. It would really take quite a bit of time. But at this point, I'm done. I'm actually done with my portion of the presentation. I will turn that over to Eric to do cleanup.
Thanks, John. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Miller with Alternative Contracting, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of the current and future projects in MDT's CMGC pilot program. Next slide. The Trout Creek project went through our formal project delivery selection process and was selected as our first CMGC pilot project. This project included the deck replacement for a large structure over the Clark Fork River on Highway 200 near Trout Creek. There were several site constraints and complexities that made this project an excellent candidate for the CMGC delivery method. The contractor proposed replacement of the deck using precast deck panels to accelerate construction and minimize the duration of the bridge closure. And you could see on this slide here, the bridge was closed to traffic for 39 days total, which was 3 days ahead of schedule. Some of the other highlights of the project were the public involvement effort for this project was fairly robust, and the CMGC process allowed real-time updates to the public. One of the unique features of this project was the fact that the contractor fabricated specialized carts to transport the precast panels across the bridge, and these carts were designed to fit the specific structure to minimize any impacts. Next slide. The Salmon Lake project on Highway 83 was selected as our second CMGC project. This project is a major roadway reconstruction with significant geotechnical and traffic maintenance issues. The project is currently in the design phase with 30% plans anticipated by the end of the year. There are numerous environmental challenges with this project, including threatened and endangered species such as grizzly bears and bull trout. There's wetlands present along the lake, and there's a wildlife management area directly adjacent to the project. In addition, the right-of-way is limited through the corridor, which presents another design challenge. There are unstable cut slopes along the east side of the roadway that are a maintenance issue for MDT. And then, of course, Salmon Lake lies along the west side of the road, as you can see in the map. And that obviously limits construction options also. Next slide. Our third pilot project is the Johnson Lane Interchange project in Billings. This project will include MDT's first diverging diamond interchange, so that'll be kind of a unique feature. One of the challenges encountered during this project was defining the decision-making process. A decision tree schematic was generated to guide that process, and that was shown earlier in part of John's presentation. The design development meetings for this project require that the MDT functional managers participate throughout the design process and not just at the milestone meetings. As a result, input on the design is gathered earlier in the process, creating a more efficient design effort. As part of the plan review process, Bluebeam is being utilized. And again, I think John mentioned that earlier. This is a tool that's not typically used, but as part of the partnering process, both the consultant and the contractor recommended it. Next slide. The fourth CMGC project in the pilot program will be the Montana 200 Lewistown area bridge bundling project. This project will involve the replacement of 10 timber bridges and the rehabilitation of one other bridge. In terms of where we are in the process now, the design consultant, which is Dow, has been selected and is currently in the project scoping phase. Alternative contracting will begin the construction manager selection process in February 2021 with a goal of having the CM on board by mid-June. In addition, the independent cost estimator will be brought on board at the same time. And that's it for me, John, in terms of the project update.
Oops, I'm sitting here babbling away and I got my mute on. Sorry about that. So thanks, Eric, Beth, and Brandon, and others there. We're going to go ahead and wrap up now. We do have some folks who I wanted to call on for lessons learned. I wanted to find out, Mike Taylor, you were telling us your audio is off. Are you back up? Are you available?
It doesn't look like his microphone is on.
Yeah,
I don't think he
okay.
has one.
All righty, thanks. So we'll go, I've got Tim Erickson with HDR, and Tim's helped us, Tim and Dustin with HDR helped us with the Trout Creek and Salmon Lake project. Tim, I guess maybe a couple minutes to share maybe some of your lessons learned, things that would help the contractor and consultant community, and maybe MDT functional managers.
Yeah, you bet. Can you hear me all right, John?
We can.
Great. So I think just it's reinforcing a lot of the things that have been already presented on today, at least from the consultant's perspective on lessons learned, just that collaboration, the valuable input that the contractor and that additional enhancement and involvement from MDT functional managers early in the process really is beneficial for the design. Gets decision making out of the way, or those decisions being made early in the process. Really it helps that risk management. It's the overarching themes of the overall presentation that you and your team have given today, John, is the management of risk, the innovations, the abilities to increase the quality, and something else that we've really seen, and I know Beth touched on earlier, is on design bid build especially. The project development can take quite a bit of time during the pre-construction phase, and even though CMGC isn't necessarily the tool to use to accelerate schedule, it gives you schedule certainty on a project for sure. It definitely accelerates the pre-construction phase compared to that design bid build, and allows for decisions to be made in a very good timely manner, and reviews to occur collaboratively, and at the same time of after the design is submitted at 30, 60, or 90, get collaborative reviews both from MDT and also the contractor, and getting any edits and design changes kind of identified, documented, and clearly stated to move forward. So I'd say, Doug, if you're on, Doug Anderson, if you want to give some of your lessons learned, and just to make sure that I didn't cover all of them that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Well, kind of like what you alluded to, Tim, everything that was covered today was kind of on my list of lessons learned that I had jotted out in preparation for this. So I guess I'll just emphasize a few of the things, again, from the consultant's perspective. I guess as Tim was saying, that CMGC process is new to MDT. The intermittent reviews that we're seeing as we do much of the design development process, it's new for all of us in terms of that collaborative effort, especially with MDT internally. You know, that consultant design flow chart that Beth showed earlier, you know, that's still generally the process that we're following, even though we're trying to accelerate a few things. That's still the process that we have, and half of those boxes are, you know, consultant activities, and the other half are MDT's corresponding review activities. And so, if you can imagine, you know, MDT has got their set windows for review at our various milestones, and when we overlay the CMGC process on top, it you know, pulls time away from potentially other scheduled projects to, you know, to address these projects. And so, you know, being prepared, sharing information when there's new innovations, you know, or just new subject matter that's being proposed and reviewed, being open-minded and being very thorough with the explanations as to why, you know, we're doing things the way they are, especially if they don't necessarily fall within MDT's current, you know, standards, specifications, and special revisions. That's extremely important. And then, and the last note that I guess I'll say is just how important partnering is in some of those initial sessions that we have. I mean, like John said, we've got a lot of experts at the table, and, you know, respecting and trusting each other's opinions and perspectives is extremely important to make the process work. And truthfully, just asking questions as to why somebody's making a recommendation, you know, or given an opinion is key. And like I said, just developing that trust between all parties will I guess ensure a successful project. So again, there's nothing today that you know, I didn't have already jotted down, but I just want to emphasize at least those two things from my perspective.
Yeah, and with that partnering too, Doug, you know, just having that open mind, keeping that open mind on there are potentially multiple ways to come to the same conclusion, and it's a value engineering process throughout the entire CMGC process. You know, collaboration, again, it seems to be a nice little buzzword if anybody's playing buzzword bingo. And collaborating directly with the contractor and doing direct cost comparisons to figure out what is the best solution for the project. And you know, if it was typical design process for consultants on a typical project for MDT, you know, you're trying to make the best guess that you have, and then it's up to the contractor to bid that and potentially provide value engineering after the fact, before construction or during construction, where that all comes up front, and having that open mind with collaboration for it. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you nailed it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. We batting cleanup, actually. Mike couldn't make it, Mike Taylor, but we were. I did talk to Ryan Olson with Granite Construction, and he'd indicated that he had something he wanted to share with us. So, Ryan, if you can hear us, go ahead and share. We got a couple minutes here. You need to make it fairly quick, but if you can, share some of your words of wisdom.
You bet. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone has really touched on it, and it, you know, it's a project first environment, and you want that partnering, and you know, you've touched on it, John, Doug has, Tim has, you know, and the reason for it is getting that best product, right? And it's okay to be passionate about it, but not adversarial, right? That doesn't make for a good team approach. But you know, sometimes it's a new product or a new way of looking at it, and takes some good data to show why that might be better. You know, part of the, you know, big benefit of CMGC is mitigating risk, right? By making sure you have a complete scope, you know, the most efficient product possible, and you know, you do that all together, right? You know, with the designer and MDT and the contractor and the ICE all together is one team. And sometimes that might mean convincing part of the team that, you know, this is a good path or not, and also listening. So, and it's a group effort, and you know, take those words for what they're worth.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to go to turn it over to Darren Reynolds, who will be fielding questions and comments.
Hey, very good. Thanks, John. We do have, looks like 9 or 10 questions that were asked during the presentation, and I'll read them out loud here and then see if one of the panelists wants to make an attempt to answer them. So the first question was, when will MDT be able to allow additional projects currently under design to utilize CMGC? And what is the MDT process to get authorization to utilize CMGC? Jake, are you on the call? And do you want to take this one, or?
I am. This is Jake. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so yeah, I'll jump in and take this. Thanks. And first and foremost, thanks to you all. Great presentation. I think very, very helpful. And thanks for all the attendees. So to answer this, I think you guys touched on it a little bit in the presentation. Our current legislation allows the pilot program, or allowing the pilot program, it sunsets in December of 2024. As that legislation was written, it only allows the 4 projects that Eric presented. And our current plan, which could change, but our current plan is to approach the 2023 legislature and report on how the program has gone, lessons learned, and whether we want to use this as a tool in our toolbox as an industry. So if the legislature approves our use of CMGC, then we would be able to use it on future projects. So, and as I said, that could change. We may present at the 2023 legislature. We may wait till 2025. We're not sure yet, but that's our current plan. Back to you, Darren.
Hey, thanks, Jake. And the next question. Also, timeframes are set for problem and conflict resolution and dollar levels as well. And we do have a partnering field guide out on our website, and it does cover timeframes for dispute resolution within the team. Does any of the panelists want to weigh in on any of the timeframes or issues that have come up during design?
Boy, I would take a shot at it. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I think
Is it related to the decision-making process?
Yeah, and I think your slide, John, on the decision-making.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Thank you for clearing that. Okay, sorry about that, Jay. Yeah, so basically we don't have a set time frame, but it's incumbent upon the project manager, or the project leader in this case, and that again is, let's say, myself on Johnson Lane, that we, as absolutely fast as we possibly can, round up the ponies, round up the people, the functional managers. We basically will do whatever we can with the goal of we can't let this thing smolder. We have to make a decision as quickly as possible. So no, there isn't a specific time frame, but I can tell you right now that decisions, a major hydraulic decision was made on Johnson Lane. I can speak to that. By virtue of us going through that process of actually making sure those 5 individuals plus the subject matter experts were there in the room making that decision. So we didn't have to work through emails. We didn't have to work through memos. We didn't have to work through we do work through conference calls, obviously, with COVID. But Jay, I hope that answered your question. And as far as the dollar levels, that was a decision that was a decision that the district made. They didn't. We initially started at $500,000 as being a threshold, but we felt like 100,000 was probably more apropos. So I think that's the answer.
And just to add to that, John, once we go to GMP and we have a contract with the contractor, then, the partnering is still in place, and there is a specific time frame set in that
think we lost
partnering
you,
guide
Darren.
for dispute resolution, and then also our change order process, if there's any of that involved, does have some financial levels of resolution as well. And the next question is, if a new process or hybrid process or method is used, what entity is responsible for writing the specifications? Or is that a collaborative effort as well? Are all parties responsible for QA, QC? And I think Beth, you want to?
Yeah, I can take a first pass at that. I would say you probably answered your own question in the idea that it's a collaborative effort. I think that as an example, I think the engineering firm is really developing a lot of the some of the technical specifications just based on their line of work. But I think the contractors contributing a ton of information, especially when it comes to materials. And then a lot of times I think it's like a really collaborative effort to write like the contract time special that we end up utilizing. So in general, I would say the contract includes contributions from all parties. And then I think it really is a group effort to QA, QC all the contract documents and make sure that we're all, tracking the same things and don't have any issues there.
And then Beth, once we have a contract and go to GMP and we start building the project, then the contractor is responsible for QC, and QA does apply just as it would with a normal design bid build project, I believe.
Right. Yeah. Good clarification.
Next question, do we hash out environmental issues prior to making a decision to go towards a DB project? I assume that means design build. Seems like we were putting a lot on the contractors to address which could result in delays and problems.
So I guess I can take a first pass at that one too, and others can add, but I would say that just the level of environmental complexity is certainly considered when we're going through that project delivery selection process, and certainly plays into the factor of whether we choose design bid build, design build, or CMGC. And I think CMGC is unique in the sense that the owner is much more involved in the design development process. And so I think we're kind of there every step of the way as we develop the plan for the project. And knowing that we have the contractor at the table, I think we have the opportunity to address environmental concerns so much better, as with any project concern. But since the example I think was environmental, we have so much more information about the construction means and methods, and what kind of specific impacts we might anticipate. And so I think we just have the opportunity in this delivery method to just get ahead of environmental issues earlier and address them sooner. So I think, kind of talking back to the issue of project risk, I think it is a good tool for kind of handling significant environmental concerns as well.
Very good. Thanks, Beth. Next question is, any thoughts on performing a progressive design build project? Same control as CMGC, but better design and construction integration. And I bet John or Beth would.
Well, I think Jake wanted to comment on that.
Did I? I will, sure. To answer the question, yes, we have considered it. And I think it's a tool that we probably will use in the future. I think right now we're, with CMGC and the pilot program, we're focused on that. And these folks that presented today have a lot on their plates. And we're gonna work through the pilot program first. And if CMGC is successful in legislation, we'll use that as appropriate on the right projects in the future. And progressive design build would probably be something we'd look at down the road, and it could become part of our toolbox of project delivery methods. So, but I think for now, and John or Darren, you feel free to correct me, but I think you guys have enough on your plate for the time being.
Yeah, we sure.
Thanks, Jake. Next question is, do the stakeholding parties determine the profit margin before commencing the estimate process. Brandon, do you want to take a shot at this one?
Yeah, I think it can. As far as the CM phase, with the technical proposal, like John had already mentioned, there's a price component to it, and it is the construction phase multiplier. And once the awarded firm is awarded the CM contract, that construction phase multiplier is used through the estimating process. So that the CMP slide that John showed, that was like the averaging of the 10.8%, that's what's used in the estimating process.
Very good. Thanks, Brandon. Next one. It would be very beneficial to involve technical experts, functional managers, e.g. environmental, in scoping prior to RFP SOQ. Is this happening regularly and considered a standard part of the process? And Beth, is that one that you wanted to take a shot at, or?
Sure, yeah, I can definitely take a first pass at that. So I guess just on the MDT side of things, we do send our solicitation documents out for a very thorough review by a broad spectrum of folks, just to make sure that we aren't missing, any big hitters when it comes to important factors of the project. So I would say, yes, that's a part of the standard process. And then I think it's important too, just to distinguish the difference between design build and CMGC. So when we're advertising for a contractor or a CM in CMGC, we're really looking for a service, and we're asking them to collaboratively contribute to a design process that really is team oriented. So a little bit of a different type of thing compared to design build, where I always view it as like we're really asking for a product in that case. So as John kind of said, it is a different animal when it comes to the proposal documents and what we're receiving from folks. So I think just kind of a helpful addition there.
Very good. Thank you, Beth. Next question. One area not listed in any of these discussions is the overall cost of regulatory compliance and the estimated compensatory mitigation costs for projects. Those costs really need to be considered in the upfront project cost estimates, and a plan for addressing that mitigation as part of the cost proposal and SOQ.
And I think I can take another pass at that one, Darren. So a good question. And I think as Brandon and John had kind of alluded to, the cost proposal for these CMGC projects is really just that markup rate. And we're figuring out the design and the estimated construction cost of the project throughout the entire pre-construction process. And it's not, totally memorialized or finalized until the end. And since we're like actively engaging with our construction experts and estimators through that pre-construction process, I think it gives us so much more opportunity to kind of assess all the cost effects of different project elements. So, in the example, talking about mitigation costs, I think that's a great example of when we can engage our CM and put together a hypothetical scenario of how much does it cost to construct mitigation credits, and if this is kind of what we would envision, and what does that work look like. And then I think on the other hand, we can compare the cost of what is it to purchase mitigation credits or something like that. So just an example where I think having more information from the expanded project team allows us to just have a clearer and better defined decision-making process for best supporting the project goals. So good question, and I think just another good example where CMGC can be really beneficial.
Hey, thanks, Beth. And I believe that's all the questions that have been asked at this point. And if you guys have a question that you're dying to ask, please type it in the chat box or jump in on the microphone as well now. Looks like we're running right on schedule.
Darren, really quickly, I just got a text from, or a message from Mike Taylor. It sounds like he's got a mic. Can we, if we're done with the question answered, can we kind of step back? I would love to hear the district's perspective on that lessons learned.
Sure, Mike, it's all field or the It's all yours, Mike.
Assuming it's working.
Yeah, we can't hear anything, Mike.
Microphone is showing up in the participant list.
Huh, interesting. Well, unfortunately, I think I guess we're.
We just lost you, John, if you're still talking.
Keeps going on
Oh.
mute. I think I'm having difficulties here too. So anyway, make a long story short, I was going to ask Darren, did you, are we going to, I guess if we have any other comments or questions, I guess people can send those in to us. We do have on this last sheet, our contacts. We really do want to hear from you guys. And if you have any questions, there's 4 email addresses. This will be, we post our link to our CMGC guidance document. We didn't mention much about that, but if you're going to go after CMGC projects, you really do need to be very familiar with that guidance doc. And likewise, as we'd mentioned earlier, this meeting was recorded, so it will. We're going to work with Michelle Wheat to get it posted on our website. So, and we'll post not only the audio but also the video portion of it. But boy, Darren, I don't know if I just stole your thunder or anything, but
No, very good. And thanks. Excellent presentation to all of you guys. You guys did a exceptional job. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Had great attendance today, and thanks for the questions. And please, as John said, do send us in your feedback, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you all. And hey, have a great day and Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy New Year.